Clay feels like nothing else. People say that clay has a memory. It remembers how you treat it, or the indents that you put into it will come back through a kiln. It's also the most community-oriented art that I've done so far. Painting and drawing, I can do anywhere. I can do it by myself. Clay really needs a group of people if you're firing kilns together or just constant feedback and lifting big 50-pound bags of material. I'm a multimedia artist working mostly in clay and illustrative installation. Currently a resident artist at Queen City Clay in Cincinnati and going to graduate school for ceramics. I started out in painting and drawing, doing a lot of illustrative ink work. I've always been drawn to buildings and clean lines and edges and three-dimensional things. And then when I went to university for a bachelor's in studio art, I took an intro to wheel and hand building class and just dove into it. And I really liked the tactile nature of it and how messy it was. I was really drawn to doing vases or things with lids that contain something, maybe contains a story. And that kind of pushed me to want to go bigger and bigger with these vases that could hold more imagery or a larger story that I could start to play with and mess with the way it was on a form versus just drawing one image on a smaller surface. So I started really thinking about pots as a canvas and how much canvas or surface I could get out of them. Growing up, I was homeschooled, so my mom read to us a lot as kids, and my dad is a writer, and I have parents who are editors and English teachers, and so language was really important to us, and folklore and stories growing up. And so a lot of my early work was based around that, and fairy tales and the act of storytelling and kind of those stories that we tell ourselves over and over again and the things that we hold on to. Part of the reason I'm interested in storytelling and started to do it on vessels is because you're working in the round. When you put a narrative on a pot, there's no clear beginning or end. It's just kind of this cycle, and you can choose where it starts or finishes or what pieces you focus on. Clay has such a fragile but also permanent nature that I think really ties into how we view stories and how they translate over time too. So combining my interest in illustration and ceramics is really my way of tying into that kind of narrative tradition of ceramics, but also things that are personal to me. I've gone from pots to doing more installation work recently, tile work and backsplashes. I've been doing the architectural door surround that's currently on the outside of Queen City Clay. That was 2,200 pounds of clay. It's a lot of surface. I'm also doing a wall right now for Queen City Clay that's specifically mine, and it's for the Queen City Clay community and tiles about their history and stories. So it's 9 by 12 feet of just fully illustrated tile work and columns. Porcelain is my favorite clay to use. I started using it my senior year of college against the advice of several people who said, you need more practice throwing before you should really use porcelain, but I also got a lot of encouragement from people who knew I was like, I want to try it. Because I think of clay as surface and I'm looking for that kind of monochromatic black and white, I like the natural background of porcelain rather than having to forcibly paint all of my pots white to start or anything like that. Last summer, 2023, I was nominated to be one of Ohio's emerging artists via the Ohio Craft Museum in Columbus. And then somehow through that, Donna Collins from the Ohio Arts Council put me forward, I think, or gave my name to Michael Reese, who is running this trip to Cuba. It's for the Havana Biennial or Biennale, which I didn't know anything about before this trip. There were maybe 12 to 15 artists from different mediums. I was the only ceramic artist. We went to different museums. I got to meet with the director of the Ceramics Museum of Havana, which is where my work will be once final things go through for the Biennale. We also went to Matanzas, which is a little drive east of Havana, where Manuel Hernández and Lolo have a gallery out there. And so Manuel Hernández is in his 90s, but he's a Cuban ceramicist, and his family works with him in Matanzas. Prior to going, I knew nothing about Cuban art, and I knew nothing about Manuel. I didn't even know his last name until we were there, so I couldn't find any information about him or what his art looked like. I just knew I was going to meet this famous Cuban ceramicist and have this experience of a different culture. He does more illustrative caricature and some comedic work. He used to be a cartoonist for a newspaper, and so that ties in. You can see the influence of it in his work. And that was exciting to me because I like the little bit of whimsy coming in. And so I introduced myself to him in bad Spanish, and somebody else helped facilitate a little bit. We had just been talking about doing vases and a couple of vessels to put in the museum, and he got excited and he took me out to see these murals that are tile murals on the sides of the buildings in Matanzas, and there are several spanned across the street. We were kind of just trying to translate for each other, and he expressed interest in doing one of those together. So that's how it got started, that we'll do pots for the museum, but tiles for Matanzas, just because it's something that we both love, is tile work. I'm making pots right now that Michael will take down to Cuba with him on his next trip, and Manuel will finish them. And then Manuel is currently working on about 36 tiles that he's starting and going to paint initially, and then I'll finish those once they come back here. We both really are interested in ideas of home and the places where people live and that kind of tradition and things that are important to us, and just the things that people hold on to no matter where they are. The biggest thing, especially as somebody working in clay, but just any type of art, is you don't want to be limited to any one thing or idea. I think it's why I was so drawn to being a multidisciplinary artist and doing clay and illustration and other types of work, is because you just start learning so much from each medium and how they can interact with another, and it just feeds itself and it feeds your own work and just keeps growing and growing as you find out how much there is that you don't know. And so it's that same thing going and interacting with other artists and other cultures, is you're reminded how much there is to learn and how much you don't know, and how we all have so many different experiences because of where we come from, but it's also fun to find those ones that are the same. Like Manuel and I he's from Cuba and an older gentleman, and I'm 24 from Ohio, and we've had very similar priorities in family and home, and really we're able to bond over that. Cuba has really opened me up to how much I love collaboration, whether it's working on community projects or just working with another artist, to open that up a little bit, because you can have certain decisions that are just yours and then some that are just theirs and some that are shared. And I think the biggest advice is to find some connections, even just locally, just plug in somewhere, because even not ceramics, but just any art, if you're an artist, you can't do it alone. You need a support system or people who are gonna push you a little bit. Nobody's going to care as much about your art as you do, but it's helpful to find people who are gonna follow your work or just encourage you down the road or connect you with people they think might be interested in you, and vice versa. That's what's kept me going, is just not feeling alone in it.